Thank you so much, first of all, for being willing to talk about this sort of subject. As a woman, I know that there's a lot of kind of emotions and there's kind of a biological thing going on around children and reproduction. And I also know that there's a lot of women out there who either can't have children or choose not to have children. So to actually talk about what that means, what it feels like, and also how you kind of come to terms with that, I think is a really huge thing. So did you kind of have an idea when you were younger of what the future looked like, what that meant?
Oh, I think we all do. And I think, I always imagined I would have kids. I always assumed I would have children. I don't think when you're growing up, there's ever really that notion that maybe you wouldn't. And of course, I did know older women who didn't have children, but I don't think it ever occurred to me what their story might have been. And of course, as girls, we're being, in the most part, brought up by somebody who was able to have children. So
interesting.
So that it doesn't occur to you. You just kind of assume that that's what's going to happen. And I remember having a conversation with my mum when I was really quite young, saying to her, "How many children did you want?" And she said 3. Now, of course, she might have wanted 5 or whatever, but I was quite young. And that sort of went into my mind at a very subliminal level, that you were able to kind of get what you wanted. I absolutely always thought I would have kids. If you spoke to any of my friends growing up, even in our 20s, probably even in our early 30s, they would absolutely have said that they expected me to have kids. They probably expected me to have the most, and they probably expected me to have them first.
I was just going to say that,
Yeah, and I'm of that group of friends, I am the only one without children. So it's definitely not the life I envisaged for myself in my growing up years, and then in my 20s and probably even early 30s.
Yeah. Why was it that you think they expected you to be one of the first as well? Was that because you're quite maternal? Was it because it's something you wanted?
I mean, it was never my primary, looking back on it, it was never actually my primary goal, which is, I think we'll probably get to that in the discussion. But yes, I am quite maternal. As they started having children, the kids kind of gravitated towards me. So I was, I'm the one when we get together playing whatever it is the games are, kind of taking the kids off, they're having a relaxing time, and I'm off like the Pied Piper with all these kids kind of behind me. So yes, I've got a natural way with kids. I naturally enjoy being around them. I'm interested. Also thinking about my job, part of my job, I'm a doula, which is a birth companion. So ironically, I'm in and around birth a lot of the time with my work. So it just kind of becomes natural. People just think that that's going to naturally, you're in that because you like children, which of course I do, and therefore that you're going to have them, because those two things in our minds just go together. If you like kids, you must want them, so therefore you're going to have them. So the assumption is, and it's a sad assumption, that if women don't have children, it's because they don't like them or because they didn't want them. And that can be really difficult for women to wrestle with and feel like they have to justify themselves. Well, I do like kids, but and having to get into this great big long essay about their history and why it's come to be that they don't have children in their lives.
I guess particularly if it's something you can't have kids, then that must be quite difficult as well, because you're also justifying, you're trying to accept it as well while you're being asked, why don't you have kids? And it's like, well, if you can't, you can't, and that's just something you have to deal with.
It is, and it's quite an innocent question. It's quite a natural question, particularly when women get to a certain age. I know it happens for men too, but less so. When you get to a certain age, that's one of the questions that you're asked. And we live in a society that kind of expects people to procreate, right? We're expected that we're going to have families and have kids. So it's quite a natural question to ask. And particularly if somebody has children, their natural instinct is to, well, all of our natural instinct is to see what we've got in common with other people. So you'll meet somebody new and they'll ask you, have you got kids? Because they want to see, is that something we've got in common? How old, how old are your kids? Are we sharing the same life stage?
Yeah.
And even though it's something like 25% of women over 40 who don't have children, the majority of those not by choice.
That's quite a high number.
It's quite a high number, but then 3/4 of women do. So the expectation, whether that's in the media or just with people that you meet, is that people are going to have kids, or there's some there's some great big story behind it. Now, of course, if I ask someone else, do they have kids, and they say yes, I don't then need a big explanation about why they've got children, and they don't feel that they need to justify that to me. But for some reason, there's something about the kind of minority status, and also because, like you say, trying to come to terms with something, you're busy trying to work through your grief or work through the justifications of how you even got into this situation. So you feel compelled to tell the backstory. And that can be just really difficult. It puts everybody in an awkward position, because the poor person that's asked you the question didn't mean to trigger you into some kind of discomfort. But now everybody's awkward because they're wishing they hadn't asked the question, and you're wishing that they hadn't asked the question. And it can just be, it can be really tough for people to kind of get through that hurdle.
Yeah. So what was, how did it kind of play out in your kind of 20s, 30s? Because I know for a lot of people within that kind of area of life, that's when the body clock starts saying, time to think about children. What was that like for you?
I didn't even think about my body clock in my 20s. I don't think I even thought about it in my early 30s. My story to being in the situation as a nearly 46-year-old woman without kids is I was in a relationship with my first husband. We'd got to the point where we were starting to think about having children, or it was sort of starting to raise its head in more practical terms. And then I realised that it wasn't the right relationship. So that relationship broke down, and then the time between that relationship ending and a new relationship starting and meeting my husband now was happening in my late 30s. So we got married in my late 30s, and then conversations were quite practically around having children. But at that point, things weren't kind of happening naturally. I made a decision that I didn't want to explore fertility treatment. We started talking about the adoption process. We started the whole journey of the adoption process, and for all kinds of reasons then made the decision that the adoption process wasn't right. So there was a specific day where that was it. I said, okay, that means I'm not going to become a mother. But that whole period was at least 6 or 7 years long, but all the way through that, everything I did wasn't related to having children. It just kind of, or it felt like it sort of crept up on me. And it wasn't until actually more recently, starting to think about my story, starting to really acknowledge what happened and what that journey has been for me, that I sort of realised that whilst I love children and I'm natural around children, actually, I didn't want children at any cost. I could have had children with the wrong person. I could have pursued fertility treatment and put all my energy into that. Let's face it, I could have started looking to start having children 10 years earlier. So actually, that was one of the things that helped me through my grief, actually, that I realised that there had been a series of decisions or a series of moments that had led to this point. It wasn't that the rug got pulled out from underneath me on a specific day. And I know that does happen to some women, and that obviously is excruciatingly difficult.
I can imagine that,
But when you actually look at it, there's probably lots of little things that you weren't thinking about at the time that have actually led to where you are. And that's not to say it's somebody's fault. or that there's any blame, because that's one of the things that I'm really adamant that there shouldn't be any blame from other people or any blame attributed to yourself. It's just the way life pans out.
And you can't predict what's going to happen.
How do we know? How do we know when we're going to meet the right person? How do we know when our body's going to be ready or not ready? How do we know what's coming? And I think that's one of the biggest things now, looking back at my journey. And one of the things I'm really passionate about helping other women work through is beginning to feel comfortable with the uncertainty of life and what life brings us, and trying to kind of make the best of where you're at, but acknowledging where you're at, not a sort of keep calm and carry on kind of attitude where you're suppressing your feelings, but more okay, if this is what I've been dealt, how am I going to make the best out of it? How can I make a difference to children? How can I have children in my life that aren't my biological children or aren't children that are living in my house? Of course, there are lots of opportunities, but you have to wait to come out the other end of your own personal loss before you're ready to do that. I think it can be all too easy for people to say, oh, well, never mind, you can just adopt. Oh, never mind, you can just foster. Never mind, you can just... Yes, but at the time that you're feeling the loss or the grief, that's so difficult to even contemplate that there's any other options out there, I guess.
And what was that like? Because there are a couple of different layers. There was the layer of you deciding that actually biologically you weren't going to go through that process. And then there's also that layer of the adopting and deciding against that as well. It's kind of like the secondary stage. What was all that like? Because that's got to be quite intense, both of those decision processes.
I guess they are. What's strange, well, for me anyway, there was quite a disassociated layer to it. So while I was living it, while I was making those decisions, I don't know that I was always feeling the impact of them or really understanding, oh, I've just shut that door, or oh, now we're in a position where we have to make this decision or that decision. And that's one of the biggest things I think we more and more in kind of modern societies, we're quite disconnected from how we're feeling. If the work that I was doing at the time, I was quite in kind of a kind of corporate setting and quite intellectual. My work was quite intellectually based, and I wasn't. It kind of didn't occur to me like how was I feeling, but that's what I gave myself time to do. Kind of afterwards, and I had to go through the whole thing. I mean, it's a proper grief process, and I know you've spoken to people about grief, and it really is this whole cycle of grief, of denial. Oh, well, there'll be another way. It'll be okay. It'll figure itself out. Just a debilitating kind of anger and loss of like, why me? It's not fair. What have I done? The blame of I should have done something differently. This didn't work. That didn't work. You start to kind of really pick things apart. And then I think you start to get to the stages of, okay, this is what it is. How can I piece my life back together in a meaningful way? In the same way that if you lose somebody, there is a process that you get to of life's never going to be the same without that person, but you can find a way of having a meaningful existence without that person in your life. And I think for me and the other women that I've spoken to, now I'm starting to develop work to kind of support women in this situation. It all seems to be quite similar, piecing together that, okay, it might be different, but I can still find a way of being fulfilled in my life, even if it isn't the way that I thought I was going to be in my early years.
It's interesting when you say about the blame and the feelings of, blame, guilt, and all of those kind of quite destructive feelings, because I mean, as women, every month our body is telling us, here's your chance, and to harbour those feelings, I think is really soul destroying. Particularly if you've always grown up with the assumption that you're going to have kids, when life has so much more meaning than procreation and things like that. So to be able to come through that and accept that takes a lot of strength. What were the things that really helped you to be able to come to terms with that?
Asking for help, actually. There is a lot of work, personal work, that needs to happen or needed to happen for me, but it wasn't done in isolation. So I looked for support in lots of different places, and I know that people get support and feel held by lots of different things. There are lots of great books. There are some brilliant, online forums and Facebook groups and things like that for people that are all in a similar situation, where you can share stories of, had another useless period. There are lots of other triggers that come up. Mother's Day's coming up now as we're talking. Every magazine you open, I opened up the local village magazine, and the first 5 pages were things promoting Mother's Day. Now, I don't get triggered by that anymore, but there were times it's just like, oh my God, everyone's a mother. And so it's about finding people that are similar to you, that understand where you're coming from, that can be really supportive, and also then working kind of holistically. So, my background is, holistic. So I've done training in physical body work, in more emotional work, but also in kind of more ceremonial work. And for me, actually, it's all of those things. It's actually finding ways of dealing with the emotions. When anxiety rises that you're going into a new situation and people are going to ask you that question, or dealing with the aftermath of a trigger or somebody saying something that, albeit that they weren't intending to be unkind, has really taken you aback. So finding techniques that work for me to just let the emotions go, or just work through those emotions. But, then the practical things of, what am I going to say? What's my form of words to explain why I don't have children? How do I feel comfortable saying the answer to the question, do you have children? Unfortunately not, and being comfortable leaving it at that, or, so it's
kind of understanding how you're grieving, but also understanding how you relate that with other people in a way that you feel comfortable. And also, I guess, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, to be able to voice that and say, it's not really something I'm ready to talk about.
Exactly that, or finding a way to say, it's kind of not appropriate to be talking about this with you. That's not an appropriate way of saying it, but finding a way to say, life doesn't always give us what we need, and not feeling like you have to be drawn in to tell your story, because really the other person doesn't really want to know your story. They think they're asking quite an innocuous question. So it for me, it was looking for support from different places and piecing those all together. But that kind of felt like it was the hard way, because where do you go? These people give you this support, or this environment gives you that support, and these techniques kind of help in this way, but then you also need... So it just felt quite disparate.
And also being ready, being ready to go out somewhere and speak to someone that you don't know, which might be easier than speaking to someone you do know, but it's being ready to make that active step. And that's scary. That's a scary thing in any area.
In any area, and also it's... you kind of know, particularly if you're going down a counselling route or a therapeutic route, one of the reluctances is I'm going to have to go there. I'm going to have to really go there. And that can put people off, because if we don't feel ready at that point to go there, it can be really quite a daunting task. But I'd like to say that when you do go there, it's valuable, and that's where the healing kind of comes from. Actually being able to work through the process of your grief and start piecing your life back together. It's really interesting, because I went through this journey independently of building up my kind of holistic work, and actually the two they've kind of met in this, hang on a minute, this process that I've just been through is exactly what I've been in my intellectual mind wanting to kind of work towards in terms of helping people. So I came up with this process, or in my mind, distilled the process into kind of 4 stages. So the first one was all really about what we've just been talking about, acknowledging where you're at, actually naming it, actually starting to tell your story. Yes, I'm a woman without children. Finding the words that feel right to talk about that. I don't want to say I'm childless.
I remember us having a conversation about this.
That feels really negative.
And we still haven't found the right word that relates to being without a child.
Without a child, exactly.
As in not being complete.
Exactly. So you're single, you're married. Yes, those words may be loaded from different people's perspectives, but neither of them, the words themselves are neutral.
Yeah.
It's just a statement. Mother is a statement. Yes, it's loaded about what you believe about what motherhood should be, but there's no equivalent for not mother. I mean, there's some weird American no-mo, which I don't even know what that is.
It's kind of trying to make it
cool, boho. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the other phrases are all about less, childless. You know, the women that have chosen not to have children often talk about themselves as being child-free. But even that's got a negative sentiment. It's like
connotates that the child is
as a shackle of some description.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, for me, honouring the words and the situation and the story is really the first part of that healing process, because you're really kind of staking your claim and stepping up to where you are and who you are, which then kind of leads to what I kind of determined the next stage as being acceptance. And that's all about, this is the way my life is. And however much I thought it might be different, this is where we are now. This is my reality. And being able to accept that allows you to put a line in the sand and accept that up until a certain point. I was talking the other day about being a mother in waiting to then being without children. And that line in the sand for me was a really important threshold to cross, because at that point you can start to do what I've kind of established as the third step in the process of release, letting go of the expectations that you had for your life, the expectations that others have, the expectations that you were going to give your own parents, grandchildren, whatever all of those things are. And the women that I've spoken to, those expectations are as varied as we are in terms of individuals. So, but until we've accepted that's going to be my life without children, I couldn't get to the point of letting go of the expectations. But once I had, actually then I've made room for something else. You can't carry around all your pain and your sorrow and your guilt and your shame and your everything else and add, you know, you've only got so much you can carry. So for me, once I'd let go of those things, then I had space to do what I've determined as kind of the last step, which is no ending, but the last step of the process of trust. Being able to trust that there's a future, being able to trust that I can live my best life, I can create things for myself and be happy and be fulfilled. But I've had to do those other stages beforehand, because it's not the sort of thing that you can just go, well, today I'm going to be fine with not having children. You kind of have to go through that journey.
And I imagine
to come out the other side.
Do you still have moments where you it comes into your head and you think, well, if I did have children?
Yeah, of course. It's like any loss. It's like any grief. There will be moments that trigger you, that it could be something somebody says. It could be, you know, there are movies that I've watched for years and some I can't watch anymore because actually, you know, that's actually too heartbreaking. And some were very difficult and they're okay now. So some situation, you know, that it will change and morph over time and we don't know. And I think that's, for me, what that last piece about trusting is. It's about trusting in the unknown, that whether you believe in fate or not, that your life has some kind of flow to it, that there is some kind of cadence to your life that's taking you somewhere, whether it's predestined or not, I don't know, but that you're meant to be in the place that you are, and you're, you know, whatever that is or why ever that is, without getting all spiritual about it, it's, yeah, this is what I've got. It's just the same way, you know, for many of years of my life I had straight hair, perimenopause has hit, and now I've got curly hair. You know, I have to accept that I've got curly hair and move forward, find out how to do something with it and move forward. Just like I can paint, I can't paint, I can sing, I can't. All of those things, those attributes and skills that we have in our lives that we try and make the best of to be the best that we can. These circumstantial things for me feel like that.
Yeah.
It feels like, yeah, we started off saying, did I feel I was always going to have kids? I assumed I would. I think we get given this thought that maybe it's our birthright to have kids. Maybe it isn't.
Yeah.
It is a miracle, and it's not a miracle that happens for everybody. So being comfortable with that has got to be a big part of the journey, I guess. Well, that's kind of how I've been seeing it. Maybe it's justifying my position for myself, but that's what's helped me feel like I can get to a more balanced place. Because when you're not there, the dark days are really dark. And I know that they're really dark because you think everyone else is having kids, it's happening for everybody else.
Yeah.
And we can't necessarily see in those times that it's not happening easily for everybody else necessarily. And then there are, like we said, 25% of women for whom it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
But when we're right in the middle of our grief, of course, all we can see is our own situation. And those days are really difficult. But asking for help or finding a community that understands can kind of just help to dissipate that sense of loneliness, I guess. Because that's can be very real.
Yeah. Is this for you why you're now passionate about supporting other women, aside from your doula work, going through it, because you've had that experience and you can relate in that way and support somebody else going through it? Does that give you that sense of purpose?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Oddly, like I said, I think I was sort of going in that direction already. I was sort of already thinking, I'm working with people who are going through big milestones in their lives. And I hadn't put my personal experience of going through the big transition from being a mother in waiting to a woman without children into that bucket. And then I was like, hang on a minute. These also are women that I can definitely help, not just through my therapeutic training, but my own personal experience, and knowing that I felt like I kind of went the hard way round, picking, oh, that person could help with this and that could help with that, actually trying to find a way to kind of galvanise things together and create a space for women that feels like a safe environment. So yeah, definitely, and trying to put together what I'm looking to do this year is kind of run retreats for women so that we can take ourselves out of the triggering everyday world and just retreat in and
do some real inner work.
Work and some real community building work to really understand, oh, there are other people, and whilst all their stories are different, we can get through this on our own and in community with other people. Absolutely. I think lots of people do that, you know, been through a personal experience and think, why don't I use my personal experience to help other people? So yeah, that's definitely one of my motivations.
I think that definitely echoes across so many different areas, and actually I think that's something that we have a responsibility to do. If we go through something and we feel that we can help somebody else to understand it, to overcome it, or just to kind of, you know, hold their hand and say, you know, I'm with you, we're going to go through it together, I think that's massive. And for the work that you do, honestly, thank you, because I know you have so much experience and wisdom to be able to share with other people. So if we can connect anyone with you who you might be able to support in any way, then I mean, that's
Thank you. And I think it's really great what you're doing, because you're breaking down some taboos, because there are lots of these topics that people are worried about saying out loud, because...
And that takes the power out of it.
You know, in fact, someone I spoke to recently said once you talk about something, you externalize it and the power is taken away from it. It no longer can burden you in the same sort of way because you've released it, and that's part of acceptance, I think.
Exactly that, and you can start seeing it from a different perspective, and it's not defining you anymore. And you can say, okay, this is one aspect, this is one part of my experience, but it's not who I am. So even actually that conversation that we were having earlier about a name for being a woman without children, well, am I not just a woman? Are we not just all women, and we've got different experiences and our lives are shaped in different ways? So it's just figuring out what our relationship is to the thing that we're struggling with. And if we can reframe that with support, then I think we can... It's not about beating it. It's about being... It's about bringing it into who we are and really owning it and taking it forward as part of our story. I've spoken to some really inspirational women who have suffered some incredibly difficult things and actually have said, do you know what? I almost wouldn't change it because it's made me who I am. And that, I mean, that can be so difficult to hear, and it's certainly difficult to feel, but actually when you can claim that for yourself, now I'm in a position that I can help people from a place of understanding. That's got to be a good thing. That means that I'm able to give something that other people aren't able to do because they haven't been through that experience. So it sort of makes sense of what's happened to me, and it can help other people make sense of what's happened to them. Maybe there is a purpose to it. Maybe you're learning something about yourself by going through whatever it is that life's brought you, which when you're in the depths of it, it's like, I don't want to learn this. I don't want to learn this lesson. But on a more philosophical level, maybe there is something, maybe achieving those milestones and working through those milestones actually does make us stronger and makes us more resilient and makes us more understanding and evolves us somehow.
It gives us more meaning to life.
Quite possibly, yeah.